But we begin, Joe, with Amazon CEO accusing the parent company of the National Enquirer of extortion and blackmail for allegedly threatened to publish scandalous photos and texts from him. It feels, Joe, like they messed with the wrong guy.
Well, it did, but it also seems very familiar, not only to us, but also to people that ran against Donald Trump in the Republican primaries. Again, there was a connection between Donald Trump and the National Enquirer from the start. And the fact that they continued this, my God, the arrogance. So after striking a deal with Robert Mueller is extraordinary.
Well, Jeff Bezos released emails yesterday claiming to show the company, AMI, threatened to release the information if he did not stop an investigation into how the Enquirer got the text messages that included explicit photos exposing his extramarital affair. NBC News has not independently reviewed the emails. To keep the information from getting out, Bezos says that AMI demanded he stop the Washington Post, which he owns, from reporting on the political motivations behind the Enquirer's initial reports about his relationship with Lauren Sanchez. In a letter posted on the blogging site Medium, Bezos writes in part this: "If in my position, I cannot stand up to this type of extortion, how many people can? Of course, I don't want personal photos published, but I also won't participate in their well-known practice of blackmail, political favors, political attacks, and corruption." Bezos adds, "I prefer to stand up, roll this log over, and see what crawls out." An Amazon spokesman confirmed the authenticity of the blog post. The Amazon CEO's allegations are the latest twist in a long simmering feud with President Trump. The CEO of AMI, David Pecker, and President Trump are friends, and Pecker has been accused of buying controversial stories about Trump to keep them private. A spokesperson for AMI declined to comment to NBC News.
Let's bring in right now the senior media reporter for NBC News and MSNBC, Dylan Byers. Dylan, wow. An extraordinary post. I forget who it was, but somebody said suddenly my chances of getting a lot of traction for my 5 favorite Star Trek films on Medium, that blog post, I mean, those chances suddenly went down exponentially. It was one of the most extraordinary reads, not only on Medium, but on any website this year. Set it up for us. Tell us exactly what's been going on in this battle.
And what pieces fit together.
Sure. Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, it's an incredibly personal, long, detailed account from Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, the wealthiest man in the world. And what it effectively is a message to David Pecker, a message to the entire American tabloid industry. Don't mess with me. I won't be exploited. I won't be blackmailed. You know, I think for a long time in the wake of Jeff Bezos' divorce and the National Enquirer report that sort of, you know, cast him not as the great innovative CEO that we usually think of him as, but rather as sort of the subject of scandal and of a particularly sordid kind of scandal. Now, all of a sudden, he's flipped the script and he's become sort of a hero of journalism, someone who is going to stand up against the blackmail and extortion that has happened to so many people who do not feel as though they can come forward and stand up against the David Peckers of the world. I think for me, the most interesting aspect of what Jeff Bezos wrote in that post is the insinuation, not the direct allegation, but just the insinuation that there's a political motivation here that is driven either by President Trump, who has a long-standing relationship with David Pecker, or by Saudi Arabia, which also has ties to David Pecker. There's an insinuation there from Bezos of a political motivation, and I think that is the thread that's going to be pulled out over the course of the next few days and weeks.
Well, that is what's so fascinating, Willie Geist, that you know, during the campaign, you had again, the National Enquirer doing Donald Trump's bidding clearly, whether it had to do with Ted Cruz or whether it had to do with other front runners. Meek and I, of course, were threatened by the staff of the White House staff that a National Enquirer story would run if we didn't change our coverage. And so many other people were threatened as well. But this moves beyond Donald Trump. Now, suddenly, that Donald Trump relationship has helped AMI in their relationship with the Saudis. And so now suddenly it is the coverage of Khashoggi, the continued cover of that murder, that now obviously is getting under the Saudi skin and their new ally, David Pecker.
Yeah, let's read that piece of the Post so people get what the context is here. In the Medium Post, Jeff Bezos wrote this, quote, "Unavoidable that certain powerful people who experience Washington Post news coverage will wrongly conclude I am their enemy. President Trump is one of those people, obvious by his many tweets. Also, the Post's essential and unrelenting coverage of the murder of its columnist Jamal Khashoggi is undoubtedly unpopular in certain circles." Donnie, let's just take a step back here and look big picture. They came at a guy who has unlimited resources to defend himself, a guy who we see now, let's give him credit for exposing himself to, he put in his memo the list of what the photographs were and what the text said and everything else. But the question Dylan raised to me is the most interesting one. Why has the National Enquirer been so aggressive about a tech executive? Yes, he's the richest guy in the world, but this isn't their usual fodder. What's their incentive? What's their motivation to go so hard against Jeff Bezos?
You know, there's only one place to look, the relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, there's no other way to slice this. And, you know, $137 billion buys you a lot of bravery. And Joe, you touched on earlier that they kind of came after you guys and you did a great judo move by kind of exposing it, and that's what he's doing.
Right.
The interesting thing about Bezos that's fascinating here is that you kind of say, wow, you know, what does this do to his image? In a bizarre way, this kind of like faceless, monolithic Amazon and Jeff Bezos, you know, he's, you know, this kind of like mysterious guy, makes him almost human. Just like Us Magazine, hey, he's just like you and me, you know, and he's playing this brilliantly. And it is stunning that even after Pecker has been called by Mueller and has been called by investigators,
right,
that he's still playing this game. The other interesting thing to unpack here is that Bezos has hired a security, you know, group to go after this, and it seems like the kind of the leading candidate behind this is Sanchez's brother, who, guess what, surprise, surprise, has relationships with a lot of Trump allies, specifically Roger Stone. So you can't write this stuff.
No, you really can't. And the thing that surprised me, Mike, when the first Bezos story came out, was the arrogance. Here's a guy that struck a deal with Robert Mueller. And then they spent, what, $400,000 on this one piece? They spent, it looked like they spent more money than any piece going after a guy, Jeff Bezos, that 99% of Americans that read the National Enquirer didn't care to read about. I mean, this reminded me of the National Enquirer cover that accused Donald Trump's first national security advisor, General Flynn, of being a Russian spy. Trump discovers Russian spy inside White House, and it's General Flynn. And we said at the time, oh, well, guess who's about to get fired? And, of course, Flynn got fired, I think, later that week. But the arrogance of them to continue to do Donald Trump's bidding and now to do the Saudis' bidding and then send a letter that I would guess a lot of lawyers around Jeff Bezos would think is extortion. And I think maybe some people in the Southern District of New York might think is extortion. The arrogance is really staggering.
Well, you know, you referenced what to me is one of the most amazing aspects of this story, in that David Pecker had cut a deal with a special prosecutor, and he's back in the batter's box, basically on the fringes of extortion, Joe, as you just pointed out. And Gene, you are housed in the paper that Jeff Bezos runs. He doesn't operate it every day, we all know that, but this is a staggering story, and as Donnie pointed out, when you have $800 billion in your checking account, there's not much to fear, because he's not going to get fired, he's not going to get shamed. He is Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, he is Jeff Bezos, and I think we may soon refer to AMI as the former AMI, because if they want to get into, well, they did want to get into this sort of a match with Jeff Bezos. It's very clear to me who's going to win this. It's extraordinary the way he published the emails that he got from AMI, and they certainly look extortionate to me. I mean, either you stop looking into us and our political motivations, or we will publish the following things. And here are the pictures we have, and we have this, and we have that, and he published all of that. You know, there was a time, as you said, Jeff Bezos is not around the Washington Post every day. You know, he's been there a bunch of times, but he lives in Seattle and he does his day job, and he leaves the journalism to the journalists. But there was one time he came to an all-staff meeting, and he was talking about the Post. He was actually versus the New York Times and other papers. He said, you know, there's a certain amount of badassness about the Washington Post that he really liked and he wanted to keep. And there is a certain amount of badassness about Jeff Bezos that I think makes us all proud to work for him, because they did, as Mika said in the intro, I think they messed with the wrong guy, and they have found that out.
Well, and while we're talking about, as you said, badasses, I read a quote from Kara Swisher, who happens to be one of those as well.
She's the best.
She said, I don't love Jeff Bezos in general, but I love Jeff Bezos in particular here. And Donnie Deutsch, what an extraordinary lesson. You can cower in the corner, and you can cave to bullies, or you fight bullies. And Jeff Bezos, at least last night on Twitter and social media and everything that I read, to a lot of people, actually, even though he did, did some humiliating things, he put it out there and said, here I am. It's screwed up, and I'm not going to let you bully me over this. The guy was a hero to a lot of people, and made people like Kara Swisher, who, again, said, I don't love him in general, suddenly look at this guy and go, okay, yeah, I respect that guy. What a lesson for people when they're dealing with crisis management.
Yeah, to make this even more fun, you have to also understand, and this comes directly from Donald Trump's former attorney. Donald Trump was obsessed with Jeff Bezos long before this, because Donald Trump is always about measuring sticks and keeping score. And as Bezos got richer and richer, it would drive Trump crazy. This is long before all of this kind of passion play came forward. So the ultimate bully, who we all know at the end of the day is really kind of an impotent, cowering little man, is really, really feeling this one, because long before this party started, he had a lot of Bezos envy going on.
Hey, Dylan, so what happens next? What part of the story are you going to be following today?
Sure. Well, in the immediate, does AMI weigh in? Do we get comment from AMI? Do we get comment from David Pecker? But the bigger picture here, Joe, I want to go back to what you're talking about with the arrogance. Why, if you have already copped to catch and kill stories, to paying to silence accusers of Donald Trump, why are you still out there pursuing, like you said, a guy who, well, maybe a household name for us, is not a household name for most of the country? To me, it's not so much what does National Enquirer have on Jeff Bezos that's driving this story. What I wonder is, what does Jeff Bezos maybe have on the National Enquirer? What does he have about the ties to Trump, about the ties to Saudi Arabia? The fact that he's floating that out there, I think, inviting all of us to sort of pursue that line of questioning more, that's where the story is going to go from here for me. And you know, the other thing I'll say is, you're right. Bezos, in the eyes of so many people, like the Kara Swishers of the world, he is all of a sudden a hero. I saw someone tweet, you know, he's earned his journalism wings with this move. So he has pulled off a masterstroke in terms of recasting his own image, in terms of making himself look like a good guy again. You know, so all of this, none of this is going to have a negative effect on Amazon. None of this is going to have a negative effect on the Washington Post. If anything, it bolsters the Washington Post, and it bolsters the morale at a company like Amazon. So this is a net win for him, and I think it's just a question how much of a loss and how damaging will this be for David Pecker and AMI.
Susan, I don't think anybody watching the show is surprised that the National Enquirer is sleazy. And that comes through in these emails and this attempted extortion of Jeff Bezos. But again, what's so stunning is that they were in a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. Right. and still carrying out this alleged extortion attempt.
And that just makes me think, well, you know, when that happened, when that was revealed, everyone kept talking about what is in Pecker's safe. Everyone, that was a big deal, and I think that we may see that this is an ongoing pattern of behavior, which will even further bolster what Bezos is saying right now as being, you know, blackmailed, fringe blackmail, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Well, Susan, I wonder, a good question to ask is, and again, please don't answer because we don't have evidence, but a good rhetorical question, Susan, is who else has the National Enquirer blackmailed for the benefit of Donald Trump? Any House members? Any Senate members? Any political adversaries? Any editors? We know he tried it with talk show hosts. That didn't work. Who else has the National Enquirer blackmailed since Donald Trump became president of the United States? What political enemies who actually didn't have the means to push back in the same way
That's a legitimate
that Jeff
question.
Bezos pushed back?
And it seems that, you know, no one would be, if you're willing to go after Jeff Bezos, you know that you can go after anybody else. So I think that's a great point, Joe. Who else along the chain has he gone after?
And I'll add one more thing, and that is that you really get the sense that this sort of Keystone Cop nature of doing business, from Trump to his friends, his stooges. I mean, to send Jeff Bezos an email extorting him and blackmailing him in black and white. I mean, you've got to be incredibly stupid and incredibly arrogant to do it under these circumstances.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.